Okay, this is the masteries video that I've been meaning to do for a few days now. Unfortunately, I've had some issues with the recording, so I'm having to do it again. I'm gonna try and keep it brief because of that. Like, I've spent a while on it already. And I'm like, my voice is, since I've had to do it a few times in one sitting, my voice is not really keeping up too well. So I'll try to keep it short. On most top laners, you want to go 21 defense. The reason being, the late offense points are mostly percentage based, so unless you have lots of damage like Tryndamere or an AD carry or an AP caster, then you're not going to benefit too much from percentage points like percentage AP or percentage AD, or again another percentage AP. The deep utility points are mostly for supports, and specifically supports in dual lanes. So gold when a nearby minion dies, when it's killed by an ally. This requires an ally nearby. Yeah, so that's not so great for top laners either. And that leaves the defense tree. The defense tree at like the bottom half is actually really good for top laners. So 21 defense is generally the way to go. Other than that, you have 9 points left over, so the 9 points you can generally want to go either 9 offense with the last points, or you want to split between defense and the other trees. So, going briefly over the 9 points you could put in offense. Double-edged sword, not too great unless you're damage focused. If you're trading a lane with it, then minions will be doing 1% extra damage, but you will not be doing enough damage to really balance that out, since minions in early game do a lot of damage to champions. Later in the game, for most top laners, unless you're like Tryndamere or Kha'Zix or something else that's damage focused, you're better off not taking double-edged sword, because a lot of the time you're more concerned late game about taking less damage rather than dealing more damage. Attack speed, sorcery, both decent points. You can feel fine putting points into either of them. If you don't auto attack much, like you're singed, you probably want to go sorcery. If you auto attack a lot and you don't use abilities as much on, let's say, Tryndamere, you probably want to go attack speed. But both points are fine. Fury helps you last hit a little bit better, but you could say that sorcery will help you trade better because your abilities will be up more often. Butcher lets you last hit better. Last hitting better is good, because the more last hits you get, the more gold you get, and the more gold you get, the more items you can buy. Expose weakness, it's more of a fill point. It's good on champions that quickly do lots of spell damage to lots of champions. Sorry, not lots of spell damage, but like at the start of the fight you affect a lot of champions with spells. So Singed, run into a fight, poison everybody, that's great. It does have to be a damaging spell, by the way, so not so great if you just W with Singed, but if you poison everybody then that's great. Shen is okay, you taunt in, that does damage, and then everyone you taunt is easier to kill for your allies, which is great. Brute Force, AD per level, fairly straightforward. That goes down into Martial Mastery, which is flat 5 AD. That's really good early game. It's basically the same thing for AP per level, and then flat AP, again, really good for early game if you use AP. Feast comes off Butcher, restores 2 health and 1 mana every time you kill a unit, which is better than recovery or meditation per point, as long as you get at least half the wave each time, and you can usually get half the wave. Even a low level player like us, if you're in silver or bronze, your last hitting maybe not so strong, or you're just really terrible at last hitting. Even if you're diamond, or maybe if you're challenger and your last hitting is really bad, then feast is still more efficient than recovery or meditation, which are the health regen and mana regen masteries respectively. So if you want extra sustain in lane and you're going 9 offense or more than 9 offense, then feast is good. So that covers the 9th point. So like you could go that, or you could go that, or you could go for that. If you're singed, you could go since Butch doesn't really help Singed very much, you could go for this for your 9 points. If you are someone who benefits from both types of, like from AD and AP, since I was going to say penetration, but obviously this isn't penetration anymore, and then you could consider doing this, but that means you can't get Legendary Guardian, which is CC reduction. So if they don't have much CC and you're a hyper champion, but you're not maybe not going super damage like your Shen deals hyper damage because he does a lot of auto attacks, but all his abilities and Sunfight Cape do magic damage, which is actually not relevant since they're not pin anymore. But his abilities still scale quite well from AP, so even then you could say that Shen might be better off against low CC teams doing this. But I hope your lane, your Qs will hit harder, but your auto attacks will also be hitting harder. You can push faster if you have the AD, but generally you want to keep it to 9 offense. So again, Singed, Shen, you can pick between either of these. You have quite a bit of flexibility on Shen since he benefits from both AP and AD. Olaf, Fury, Sorcery, both good. I'd probably go Sorcery most of the time. You can Butcher like the last hit better. But for the defense points, Tough Skin you want to avoid since it's only jungle mastery. Please don't take it if you're not jungling, unless you have a really cheesy strategy that involves neutral monsters. Enchanted Armor, if you're building tanky, then Enchanted Armor is good, but only once you start getting tanky items, because it only affects bonus armor and magic resist. So if you're looking for early game stats, then you want to avoid it. If you don't mind, since it does scale quite well, then Enchanted Armor is good on tanky champions like Shen. Block versus recovery, since you want to advance further down the tree, block is generally better than recovery. You get auto attacked quite a lot in top lane. This is only 1.5. If you get auto attacked more than once every 5 seconds, then block will beat recovery. And it also leads to unyielding, which is really good because it reduces all incoming damage from champions by 2 if you're melee, 1 if you're ranged. Very useful against dots, very useful against auto attack harass in the early game. Very useful against Yorick, who has ghouls. The ghouls do damage, but they don't hit very hard. They just have lots of ghouls and they attack kind of frequently. So reducing all that damage by a flat amount is really good. Health, pretty straightforward. More health is good. Early game health is very good. Percentage health, this is just become a bit tankier. And then you get into some of the decision making points. Oppression. If you are Syndreth Rylai's, if you are Olaf, and you're good with using your Q, anyone who's able to consistently apply CC to opponents, like for most of the fight. If you're only Shen, then you probably don't want to take Oppression unless someone else on your team is able to be slowing them lots. If you have an Ashe in your team, you can consider taking Oppression. If you have a jungle Singe that goes Rylai's, then you can consider taking Oppression, but on a lot of champions it's not going to be worth it since the CC is not going to be applied frequently enough throughout the fight. But if you are one of those champions that can apply CC frequently, another example might be Nasus, then Oppression is pretty good. Hardiness is great, early armor is very good in lane, reinforced armor is also really good but not in lane. Later in the game, crits do most of the damage in a team fight, assuming the AD carry is like not really far behind or anything, then a lot of damage is going to be coming from crits. Reducing a lot of damage by 10% is really good for a single point. Perseverance is really good, percentage of missing health, much better than recovery, and it scales really well. Very good in lane, very good if you're getting siege down at a turret mid to late game. Second wind, if you fight on low health, then this is good. If you do not fight on low health, and you do not have any source of healing, then it's bad. That's pretty straightforward. Tenacious is actually the reason that I do not take resistance most of the time. So it provides 1.5 total resist per point per enemy champion nearby. So in lane it is as good as resistance in terms of total points. Even against someone who deals mostly magic damage later in the game, during the laning phase a lot of the damage you take will be auto attacks. So Tenacious is basically as good as resistance per point in lane, and then outside of lane when there's multiple enemy champions it's better than resistance. So I generally do not take resistance. Evasive is very conditional. It requires you put 3 points in resistance, which is already quite a big investment for when you could again be putting points in Tenacious or something else. The other reason I don't really like Evasive too much, it only affects AoE spells, and the AoE spells have to be magic damage, so not helpful against Riven or Zed or Shen other than Shen's Taunt. So very conditional, and it requires you to put points in resistance, so I generally do not put points in these masteries. Swiftness, if they have a lot of slows, then Swiftness is probably pretty good, especially useful on champions like Singe to rely on movement. Runic Shield, mostly a cheese mastery. If you level 1 all in, then Runic Shield is pretty good. If you do not level 1 all in, then it's not really that great, since it only gives you a 50 shield. The 50 shield does not scale, and it only regenerates when you respawn. So when you're dying late game and you respawn with 50 extra shield, that's not really a lot. One other thing you could take it for is actually to counter cheese. Like if you're concerned that the enemy top laner might go red pot and all in you at level 1, Runic Shield is probably a good idea. Like if it avoids you from dying at level 1, then Runic Shield is definitely worth it. Tenacious I already covered. Second one I already covered. So that's the defense points. If you don't use oppression very well, then this would be a pretty good page. If they don't have many slows, you could take a point out of swiftness. If they have very little CC, you could even do something like that. Or you could put the point in Runic Shield if you're concerned about cheese or you want to cheese the enemy. On champions that do not scale especially well off the AD or AP, you could go mixed defense utility. So if you're a mana champion, you want some extra mana regen, you could go for that. You want some extra move speed, or Nasus or Olaf or Singe, you go for the foot. If you build a lot of mana, then Strength Spirit is okay. If you do not build a lot of mana, then Strength Spirit is not really worth taking. Alchemist uses a lot of pots, then Alchemist is really good. I believe it affects Flask, so if you are Singed or Olaf and you want to build a Flask, then Alchemist is something you might want to consider. But keep in mind that you're losing the 9 in offense if you do decide to go for Alchemist. Summoner's Insight reduces the cooldown of summoner spells by 4%, that goes into 7 and then 10%. So that's pretty good, especially if you trade summoners that you'll have a window of time where the enemy doesn't have summoners and you do. That lets you all in them, and then you can just get a free kill off that. Trinkets, if you use trinket slots, then you can consider that. If you recall in dangerous situations a lot, then Phase Walker might be a good option, but it obviously doesn't, it's not a combat stat, so maybe not as useful. If you recall a lot, then Phase Walker probably good. It saves you a little bit of time. You recall 10 times, you save 10 seconds in your game. But other than that, I generally prefer getting extra move speed or mana regen. So if you want to go 9 in utility, you could go for something like this, since Colony Master is a really good point if you use potions. 20 health and 10 mana, combine that with Alchemist and your potions are a lot more effective, so that's really good. But let's say you want to get Tenacious and Legendary Guardian and Swiftness and Oppression. Let's say you're Nasus. You could do this. You stay in lane longer, you get extra Q stacks with the extra mana. The extra potion duration means your potion is more effective, harder to push you out of lane. Again, you can combine that with your passive for lots of sustain. This is more of a fill point. Move a little bit faster. It's only 0.5%, so it's not a lot, but every little bit counts. You're really tanky, you're really hard to push out of lane, since you have Perseverance, you have your passive, you have Second win, once you get perked down, you have Alchemist, you really hard to push out a lane, you get Q stacks forever because you have lots of mana. So this is really good on Nasus. If you're singed, you might want the move speed instead. And then if you use Flask, Alchemist good. Even if you don't use Flask, Alchemist still pretty good. If you're not concerned about cheese, you're not trying to cheese someone, then you could go that. 4% for the first point, slightly more efficient. Especially if you use TP, since TP is a really long cooldown. Reducing that by a percentage is quite good. So on some champions you might want to go defense utility. On most champions you want to go offense defense with 9-21 or 21-9, or then you could go 24-6 or 25-5, something like that. But yeah, that's my masteries video. Thanks for watching and peace.